I asked a skinwalker. My family decided to go out of the reservation for a few days to visit a few other family members in the holidays. I had to stay and feed the animals, and I was pretty sick at the time, so a car trip wouldn't have done any good. I had just finished dinner, and I still had to feed the animals. We have a cabin type setup on the res, and it's got a long porch out the back, and it's open with really wide steps going into the yard. We've got 2 dogs and a chicken coop in the far corner of the backyard. I grabbed the lantern off of the hook near the back door and walked out toward the chicken coop to check on them. They were all asleep and in one of the corners huddled like they were frightened. I don't really watch chickens' sleeping habits, but it seemed off to me. I turned around, and off in the distance, out of the yard was a large black dog. I guessed it was one of my dogs that got out, so I called him, but he didn't respond. Ha! Food will get your attention. I walked back up the steps, and I noticed something out the corner of my eye. There was a figure sitting down in the shadows, and I could only just make out his features. My uncle's place isn't far from here, so I assumed it was him coming to check up on me. Uncle Tom. It shook its head. I got a bit mad because it must be my cousin who's a little older than me. He's always pranking me. I asked if it was him, and it shook its head again. I really wasn't in the mood for messing around tonight. My head was pounding, and I just wanted to get back into bed. I walked inside and put food in the dog's bowls and turned back to the door. My stomach knotted up. It was standing by the stairs now. I left the lamp on so I could see what I was looking at. This person, over 7 feet tall, nodding its head at me furiously, with a huge open mouth. I dropped the dog food, slammed the door closed and locked it. It kicked at the door and stomped away. I tore through that house and locked every window and door in it, puked up my dinner, and crawled into bed. I heard a few more bumps around the house, but nothing that sounded like a break-in. I don't know how I managed to fall asleep. When I woke up, I opened the door to check on the animals and feed the chickens. There were large human footprints and dried blood on my porch. The coop door was open, and only 1 chicken was missing. The rest were still in the corner. I didn't find my dogs for almost a week after that. They were found a few miles away from my house alive, but shaken up. My mom put ash on all the doors and windows of the house to keep the creature away for now. Skinwalker birthday surprise. I live on a reservation. I'm almost 19 now. I was 17 at the time, and it's always been a standing rule that we can't leave our house after sunset. There's always been bad things happening. People going missing, animals going missing, animals showing up, and mutilated animals. Weird stuff. I was allowed to have a few friends over for my birthday party. I was really excited because this land is beautiful, and I always like to show it off. 3 of my friends made it up here, 2 boys and a girl. I'll just refer to them as boy 1, etc. We went for a long walk up the mountain a little way from the res, because the view up there is amazing, and even though it was getting on dusk, I figured we'd be fine. There's 4 of us all in a group together, and we've got hiking sticks with the spears at the end, and it's only a 20-minute walk there and back. The OY1 saw the end of a goat, but it was missing a tail, and it looked injured. We tried to get closer to see if it was alright, because all the goats around these parts are owned, but as we got closer, it made a really loud low bleat and ran over the ridge. The OY1 and I ran off the track after it and looked over the ridge. It disappeared. We stopped so we could hear which direction it was running to, but there was no noise at all. I thought it was a bit weird, and the sun was disappearing faster than I thought, so we started to head back. My friends would always laugh at the rules my family has about going outside at night, but they were about to find out why we have that rule, and I was about to get a fresh reminder. Boy 1 was leading us with his phone light. It wasn't that dark that we couldn't see in front of us, but the trail has drops and rocks, and because of the bushes to the sides of us, it made it really hard to see our feet. There was this giggle in front of us. We stopped because it was really close. It sounded like a turkey gobble, which is uncommon in my area. It happened a few more times after that. The sound gave me goosebumps because it didn't sound right at all. The next thing we saw still plays with my head. Going from left to right across the path was this thing. My heart jumped into my throat. It looked like a large coyote, but its limbs were mutilated like it was crossed between a human with sharp long claws. Its face looked distorted and human, but it was animalistic at the same time, and it had really long teeth. The scariest part is the way it moved. It was rocking back and forth on all fours like a praying mantis. It'd just take a step and rock backwards and forwards, and then lurch another step forward. Its head was bowed down in between its shoulders. None of us moved for what seemed like a couple of minutes, just watching it jolt itself across the path. It looked like it was just going to go past us and leave us alone, until the girl started crying and freaking out. The animal flung its head in her direction and made a really low growl, sort of like a house cat, because it had the voice behind it as well. It twisted its body around and started coming at us. It was terrifying. I yelled and threw down my spear at its head, but it was like it bounced off. When it got to me, it stood up. It was so tall. It barged into me, making me fall down. It started hiccuping and lurching, and then it barged into boy 1. It backed into boy 2, and he landed in a ditch just off of the trail. There was hardly any light on us now. When it got to the girl, it contorted its body over the top of her and held her down. She started screaming. Boy 2 got up and hit it with his hiking pole hard. It jolted away up the path behind us, making a crying noise, almost like it was mocking the girl. It was playing with us. We picked ourselves up and ran as fast as we could back down the path and across the reservation to my place. We told my mom what happened, and she told me and my friends the legend of the skinwalkers. I didn't sleep well that night. I kept waking up to a crying sound outside that would stop just as my ears adjusted to being awake. I don't want to look outside my curtains. I never want to see its face again. The girl said when it was on her, it was hissing in her ear, and it was whispering things to her that she didn't understand. I still get nightmares. My friend Skinwalker story. Back in college, a buddy and I were hanging out in our dorm room, smoking some weed and chilling. We get on the topic of creepypastas and stuff, and I mention that I've heard some really creepy skinwalker stories. My buddy gets really quiet out of nowhere. I saw one, once. Up close and personal. That shit is real, bro. Of course, I asked him to tell me more. He said he didn't like talking about it, but eventually opened up. So, his story took place back in the summer before he left for college. Him and his high school friend group had planned a big last hurrah camping trip. He was from Scottsdale, Arizona, and I think he said they only drove a good hour and a half outside the city to one of their friends' parents' ranching properties. There's about 8 people in their group, and everyone shows up around the same time in 3 separate cars. Around when they show up, it's already starting to get dark, so they set up their tents and a campfire and start drinking and smoking. This one dude in their group, let's call him Tim, is being a little more quiet than usual. My buddy asks him what's wrong, and he says something like, "I don't feel good, just a little under the weather today." Regardless, they start making brats and are all having a good time. And out of nowhere, everyone notices Tim is gone. Just totally vanished. Nobody even saw him leave, even though everyone was relatively close to the fire. The group starts calling his name, thinking he's pranking everyone. Then they start to get worried once Tim has been gone for over an hour. So my friend and a couple others go out into the hills to search for him. They walk around for a good 15 minutes calling his name before they finally get a response. It's not Tim. Instead, they hear the familiar howl of a coyote. And it's answered by a couple other coyotes. My buddy says he was a little worried at this point that Tim might have gotten dragged off by the wild animals. Everyone in their group was paranoid because there's no way Tim could have gone missing without anyone noticing, just no way. They hear another howl, suddenly. It's longer than the others, and different in that it sounds off, like if someone had a recording of a coyote howling and decided to play it. My friend's blood ran cold when the howl ended in a sort of hacking laughter. And unlike the howl, the laughter sounded close. Like 20 feet away close. The group starts frantically looking around, convinced Tim is out there fucking with them. He isn't. They don't see anyone. They return to the fire a little shaken up. Everyone is really starting to get worried at this point. The group starts considering calling the police when suddenly a truck pulls up to the campsite. It's Tim's truck. Tim steps out of it and is wondering why everyone has been freaking out. Tim says he's sorry, he got off work 2 hours late and hurried out to the ranch as fast as he could. This is when the group realizes that Tim didn't carpool there with anyone. As if on cue, they hear another long, drawn-out howl just like the other one. At that point the group hoped the fuck out of there. They ended up paying to camp in a designated campground, and the night went on as normal. But my friend still says he thinks about when he asked Tim if he was alright. He claims that at the time he could definitely tell something was off about Tim, but didn't think anything of it. But now he's 100% convinced that Tim was some sort of skinwalker entity impersonating his friend for shits and giggles. How the creature knew what Tim looked and sounded like, well, he has no explanation for that. Maybe it just got inside their heads. A snowy deception. It was beautiful. Its antlers glittered with fresh snow, reflecting the moonlight on its watery surface. The deer stood silently in a small opening in the forest. I had gone on one of my nighttime walks through the trails behind my house, looking to kill some energy and time before I fell asleep. It was well past midnight, the trees casting pitch-black shadows as the light of the stars bounced off of every single branch. I'd always had a connection with nature, but this was my first time seeing a creature of this status up close. It was truly majestic and like nothing I had seen before. My house sat on the border of a deep forest, leading out into the Canadian wilderness. I'd been careful not to venture too far from home, but the wandering of my mind would truly decide the path I took each night. It began to slowly walk away from me, deeper into the forest. The snow crunched beneath its hooves, imitating the noise of your head hitting the pillow before you slept. Although it was such a simple creature, even the mundane things like the way it walked were fascinating. I followed closely behind, as it led me into the secrets of the night forest ahead. As it moved further, everything around me appeared to fall completely silent. The wind was at a standstill, the only noise coming from the snow below us. It began to quicken the pace, almost as if it were jogging to its destination. I kept my pace equal, walking roughly 10 feet behind it. Suddenly, it had stopped in its tracks. I stopped moving to mirror it, fearing for my safety next. The deer was so beautiful that I had stopped thinking about my surroundings and safety entirely. It seemed that I had walked almost 30 minutes straight into the forest, with only the footprints I left behind quickly being filled with falling snow. The deer stopped to look at me, matching my gaze as I stood cautiously, trying to appear as passive as possible. After a moment of pure silence, the deer quickly dashed to my left, disappearing into the night forest. It had clearly been startled by me, or so I thought. I was alone, surrounded by the white glow of snow and the dark overhang of the pine trees above. I began my walk back to my house. I heard it. A soft but piercing screech filled the area around me. It sounded as if it were deeper in the forest, but I knew better. Whatever had made the noise was very close to my current standing. I picked up the pace as I jogged back, suddenly stopping in my tracks. The deer stood in the middle of the path in front of me. I had no intentions of disturbing it, and surely didn't want to find out what a cornered deer can do with large antlers. It stared at me with some form of intensity in its eyes, almost as if it were trying to anticipate my next move. I began to slowly back away until I'd realized why it had been staring at me. I turned around, only to find that another deer stood behind me. It was identical to the one in front of me, with each and every detail in the same place. The spots were the same sizes and angles, the antlers had the same length patterning. The high-pitched screeching began again, filling the area with the awful noise. The deer behind me was the source. The deer in front of me ran, disappearing yet again into the snowy forest. That left me alone with the deer behind me. But it was most definitely not a deer. I turned to face it, watching in horror as the transformation began. Its bones and skin began to contort and move out of place, the brown fur rotting down to a pale, leather-like layer of paper-thin skin. Its eyes turned red, elevating with the rest of its body as it stood on its hind legs. The bones crackled as they restricted the skin, stretching every inch with noises like fabric tearing. It was most definitely not a deer. The pale creature stood before me, its rib cage holding the pale untextured skin out from its shoulders. Those eyes. They were unlike anything I'd seen before, radiating true terror. I backed away slowly, as it opened its human-like jaw, letting out a screech like the ones before. It was hunched over, slowly approaching me as I moved. It dropped back to all fours, readying itself to attack. I ran into the trees, hoping to lose it with a game of life or death tag. I ran like I hadn't before, the snow flying off of my shoes as I moved through the trees. I ran until I couldn't, and then kept running. I could hear it following closely behind, the leaves shaking as it reached for me. I felt it swing at my back, tearing my skin with a sharp slash. I didn't stop running, my adrenaline carrying me into my backyard. The noises behind me stopped as I stepped into my backyard light, disappearing into the infinite darkness. I had collapsed at my back door, from blood loss and pure shock. Luckily, my wife had discovered me merely 30 minutes after I had passed out. She called an ambulance and demanded I tell her what happened. I don't know what it was, but I'm not exactly eager to find out. I told her and my family that I had fallen down a hill and scraped my back poorly. It raised some eyebrows, but I refused to share the horrors of that night, and I most definitely refused to go on another late-night walk.